Russia and China have a profound relationship built on shared strategic interests. Both countries have been challenging Western dominance, particularly the influence of the United States. And ever since the Russian-Ukraine conflict, many businesses, investors, and people have exited the Russian economy. They closed down trade, closed businesses, and led to money flowing out. There is, however, one country that has helped fuel Russia's economy, and that is no other than China. China under Xi Jinping took over what was left by Western companies. But along the way, China has actually benefited significantly from doing this. They did not just help Russia's economy stay afloat by buying up their goods or providing services and investment. They also gained more control and influence over Russia's market. How can that be? Well, if we were to graph out China's imports from Russia, we get to see that they have been buying up so much of Russian goods. Here, as you can see in the graph, China's imports grew massively. In 2020, it was just $57.8 billion. But by 2023, it rose to a massive $129 billion, more than double than what was seen 3 years ago. But what's even more surprising about this is the fact that these imports have helped fuel China's economy. And that can only be understood if we graph out what China has been buying from Russia. Here in the new graph, you can see that China's imports of Russian goods are mainly focused on one category, and that is fuels and oils. Fuels and oils contribute a stunning $94.77 billion in China's imports from Russia. This importation of fuel and oils have helped both Russia's and China's economy. On the Russian side, it helped them because it gave them a steady source of income during a time when many Western countries imposed sanctions and stopped buying Russian energy. With fewer buyers in the global market, China became a lifeline for Russia's oil and gas industry, allowing Moscow to keep its economy running and fund its government operations, including its military expenses. On China's side, it helped them because China is still well known as the world's manufacturing hub. And by being a manufacturing hub, they need a lot of energy to keep their factories running, from producing electronics and machinery to clothes and vehicles. In fact, China is well known to be the world's largest importer of oil and gas. Here's a graph on the importation of crude petroleum by country in 2023, data from OEC. Here you can see that no economy comes close when it comes to petroleum imports. For 2023, China imported a massive $319 billion, which is more than double the second largest importer in Asia, which is India, which imported just $140 billion. And indeed, if we also graph out the countries that exports petroleum to China, we get to see that Russia plays a big role. Here, you can see that Russia exported more than Saudi Arabia, Iraq, or any other Middle Eastern economy. This shows just how Russia fuels China's economy. But what's arguably more surprising about these fuel imports is that they are actually being sold at a much lower rate than international benchmark prices. Western sanctions, such as the EU import ban and G7 price cap introduced in December 2022, forced Russia to sell oil at a discount to international benchmark prices. China, as a willing buyer, not part of the sanctions, benefited by securing cheaper crude. For instance, here's a graph on the Brent oil price. Here, you can see that oil prices have fluctuated, but when China buys Russian oil, they are usually at a significant discount compared to the Brent benchmark. For example, while Brent oil hovered around $85 per barrel in mid-2023, China was able to buy Russian Urals crude for as low as $60 to $65 per barrel. That's a significant advantage for China. And if you actually think about it, it's not really Russia who gains from this, it's China. How so? Well, that's because China gets all the benefits of cheap energy without taking any of the political risks. China doesn't have to directly support the war or face global backlash like Russia does. Instead, it simply steps in, buys discounted oil, powers up its factories, and keeps its exports competitive on the world stage. All while the West is busy punishing Russia. So, in essence, Russia's oil exports even though it has helped keep Russia's economy afloat, is actually helping China's economy much more. It is no wonder that China had chosen to buy fuel from Russia, and nobody else. If we even graph out the crude petroleum imports of China in 2019, we get to see that Russia wasn't the largest provider of petroleum to China. It was Saudi Arabia. This change in just a few years highlights just how important it is for China to buy cheap oil. And another thing about this fossil fuel is that it's not just crude petroleum. One important way is natural gas. Gas flows to China via the Power of Siberia pipeline, the first pipeline connecting Russian gas fields to China, and they have been ramping up massively. If we graph out the largest destinations for Russian natural gas, we would also see that China is the number one on the list, importing over $5.1 billion in 2023. It is also important to note that Russia and China are negotiating major new gas pipelines. The planned Power of Siberia 2 would route 50 billion cubic meters of gas annually from western Siberia, the Yamal region, to China via Mongolia, nearly matching the capacity of the defunct Nord Stream pipeline to Europe. This project gained urgency after the Ukraine war as Moscow seeks to double its gas exports to China to offset the lost European market. Beyond natural gas and fuel, coal is also an essential part of the Chinese economy, and they have also been massive buyers of Russian coal. Here, as you can see in the graph, China had purchased over $14.4 billion in coal from Russia in 2023. This is a big change from 2019, when Russia was not even the largest provider of coal to China. It was Australia back then, and they only provided $2.17 billion to China. If we graph all of these out, we get to see that China is indeed a massive buyer of Russian goods. As you can easily understand from the graph, China is a top buyer of coal, crude oil, LNG, second only to the EU, oil products, second only to Turkey, and pipeline gas, second only to the EU. Now, after these imports which fuels China's economy, we also need to understand that China has been filling up the void left by Western companies in Russia. After the invasion, many Western companies and brands, from automakers to electronics firms to machinery suppliers, pulled out of Russia. This created large gaps in the Russian market, gaps that Chinese companies have moved rapidly to fill. The result is an inversion of roles. Russia has grown more dependent on Chinese imports for everything from cars to smartphones, making China an export lifeline for Russia. One of the clearest examples of China's increased footprint is in the automotive sector. Prior to 2022, Russian consumers mainly bought cars from Western, Japanese, and Korean brands such as Lada, Renault, Volkswagen, Toyota, Hyundai. Chinese cars were a niche, less than 10% of the market. But after the war, companies like Renault, VW, Toyota, Ford, and others halted sales or exited Russia. Thus, by mid-2023, over 70% of new smartphones sold in Russia were Chinese brands. But remarkably, over 50% of new cars sold were also Chinese. Chinese car brands captured more than half of Russia's car market in 2023, up from single-digit percentage pre-invasion. In fact, in August 2023, Chinese brands' share peaked at approximately 56% of monthly sales. As graph illustrates, Chinese car makers essentially went from minor players to market leaders in Russia within a year and a half. Brands like Haval, Chery, Geely, Great Wall, Tank, and others have become household names in Russia. 8 out of the top 10 best-selling car models in Russia in the first half of 2023 were Chinese-made. Let's graph out the entire exports of China to Russia by category, just to show you how much China is benefiting from the Russian market. Here is a graph on the Chinese exports from Russia in 2019. Here, you can see that China didn't really export a lot of goods to Russia back then. They exported about $53.9 billion, and these were a mix of electrical machineries, mechanical appliances, and so on. In 2023, however, exports from China to Russia doubled to over $110 billion. And while machinery and electronics still take up a large chunk, you can see that the automotive industry has emerged as the second largest, contributing over $22.5 billion. That's a big increase in just a couple of years. This goes to show how reliant Russia has become on China for everyday goods, industrial supplies, and now even vehicles. So, as you can see, Russia's war-driven pivot to China has created a new economic reality in Eurasia. Russia is fueling China's growth, literally with hydrocarbons and figuratively by buying Chinese products, in ways few imagined before 2022. Meanwhile, China is propping up Russia's sanctioned economy, preventing collapse by serving as a buyer and seller of last resort. It's a relationship of convenience and necessity, rooted in shared interests against Western dominance. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.